Their cities were burned, their economy shattered, their entire way of life gone. But while most of the South was trying to rebuild, one man was busy rewriting. His name was Edward Pollard, editor of the Richmond Examiner, and he was about to write the book that would change American history forever. The Lost Cause, a new Southern history of the War of the Confederates. This book essentially became the propaganda's blueprint. You see, Pollard understood something crucial. They say history is written by the winners. But Pollard knew that if you control how history is written, you control the narrative. And in those pages, he laid out exactly how to do it. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. First, rewrite the cause of the war. While Confederate Vice President Alexander Stephens had proudly declared in 1861 that their new government was founded on the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, Pollard and his supporters pushed a different story. According to them, the South fought for states' rights. They were noble defenders of their homeland against Northern aggression. And enslavement? Well, apparently, that was actually good. But Pollard didn't stop there. He and his fellow Lost Cause writers turned Confederate generals into saints. And none more so than Robert E. Lee, the most successful military commander of the Confederate Army. Lee became more than just a general. They transformed him into a Christ-like figure, the ultimate Christian soldier who they claimed only reluctantly took up arms to defend his state of Virginia. After his death in 1870, they elevated him to almost godlike status, even calling him the Second Washington. Never mind that he led an army against the very nation Washington helped create. Confederate soldiers weren't fighting for enslavement. They were heroic warriors defending their homes against invaders. And the South's defeat? That wasn't because their cause was wrong. No, it was simply because the North had more men, more guns, more resources. They were just overwhelmed. It sounds absurd, right? That the losing side of a war could just rewrite history? But here's the thing. Pollard's book became the very foundation for a systemic campaign to reshape American memory. A campaign so effective that its lies are still repeated today. Because just 1 year after Pollard published his book, something started happening across the South that was truly shocking. While Confederate men were busy writing their version of history, Southern women were about to turn that story into reality. It started innocently enough. In the aftermath of war, women across the South formed memorial associations to collect the bodies of Confederate soldiers and give them proper burials. But these weren't just grieving mothers and widows. They were seeds of something much more powerful. In 1869, Confederate veterans, including Braxton Bragg and Jubal Early, formed the Southern Historical Society, and their mission was to defend every aspect of the Confederate cause through published papers and speeches. But it was what happened next that would change American history forever. In 1894, a group called the United Daughters of the Confederacy was born. These women had the most insidious plan to control what children were learning at the time. That's right. We all know education has perhaps the biggest impact on kids when they're young. And if you teach your next generation that the Confederacy were fighting a noble cause, what do you have? You have another generation of bigoted, hateful, and ignorant people, exactly the sort of people who would perpetuate an obvious lie. Within just a few years, the UDC had grown to 100,000 members strong. They had chapters beyond the South and across the entire country, and they wielded their power with surgical precision. At the heart of this operation was Mildred Rutherford, an educator and author who created something called a measuring rod for textbooks, a manual that would determine what version of history American children would learn. The system was brutally effective. Any book that didn't match their version of history was marked with "unjust to the South" and removed from the library shelves. Any textbook that mentioned the horrors of enslavement or the true causes of the Civil War were banned from classrooms. But they didn't stop there. They created the Children of the Confederacy, where young Southerners were required to memorize the Confederate Catechism, a call and response system that drilled their twisted version of history into children's minds. Kids as young as 6 were taught to recite truths about the Confederacy, competing for rewards as they absorbed these lies. They staged elaborate ceremonies where school children were arranged into living glass at monument unveilings, And those Confederate monuments you see in town squares across America, the ones causing so much controversy today? Yeah, the UDC put those there. They didn't just build statues, they placed them strategically in front of courthouses, in town squares, anywhere they could cement their version of history in stone. But reshaping Confederate memory was just the beginning. These women had an even darker, more disturbing goal. You see, after the Civil War ended in 1865, America entered a period called Reconstruction. For the first time, the federal government tried to make good on the promise of freedom, passing the first Civil Rights Acts in American history and constitutional amendments that guaranteed Black citizenship and voting rights. Black Americans seized this opportunity. They were voting, getting elected to Congress, building schools and businesses, and creating their own newspapers. They were living proof that the lost cause narrative was a lie. So the architects of the lost cause did something ingenious. They made sure Black voices would never reach the history books. Remember those textbook guidelines created by Mildred Rutherford and the UDC? They didn't just promote Confederate heroes. They systematically removed any mention of Black achievement. The Freedmen's Bureau, Black congressmen, the Civil Rights Acts, all erased. But they went even further. As Reconstruction was giving Black Americans unprecedented freedom, a group of white Southerners emerged with a mission to take it all away. They called themselves the Redeemer Democrats. Democrats who wanted to redeem the South by returning it to white. These redeemers couldn't be as obvious as they were during Confederate days. No more riding around in masks intimidating Black voters. Instead, they had to be subtle. So they created a two-pronged attack. On the ground, radical groups like the Red Shirts and White League used violence to drive Black voters away from the polls. Suddenly, owning people as property wasn't a brutal system anymore. It was reimagined as a teaching experience, where enslaved people became more civilized. Some lost cause writers even claimed that enslaved people had better lives than British working-class people. And here's the worst part. By the time Jim Crow laws were firmly in place, there was no one left in power to challenge those lies. When that wasn't enough, they created new stereotypes, straight from lost cause propaganda, meant to portray Black Americans as unprepared for freedom. These were weapons designed to justify segregation and the complete reversal of everything Black Americans had achieved during Reconstruction. But here's where this story takes an even darker turn. You see, the South was about to pull off something unprecedented. They were going to make the North embrace their lies. From the White House to Hollywood, from college classrooms to children's movies, the lost cause was about to become America's official story. But the most terrifying part was yet to come. You'd think America would reject the propaganda of traitors who nearly destroyed the Union. But not only did the North welcome the lost cause with open arms, they taught it in their schools, screened it in their theaters, and ultimately helped turn Confederate mythology into American history. And here's the most disturbing part. This was endorsed by presidents, taught by Ivy League professors, and celebrated in blockbuster films that Americans still watch today.